Welcome to NBA Jam Tatman QC on Fire Edition. Boom shakalaka.
Happy little games.
Ooh, yeah. Tatman QC and his happy little games are the cream of the crop. Ooh, yeah.
Pro wrestling and video games. It's a match made in heaven and a match made in hell. The hell being is, I can't get enough. There's something oh so satisfying about the over-the-top theatrics mixed in with the athletic competition. Yes, Poindexter, I know it's not real competition, so you might as well stop typing those comments right now. All you've got to do is mix in a little bit of wrestling with some good old-fashioned video game goodness, and you've got a recipe for success. Usually. We've had our fair share of wrestling video games, but the franchise that started out over 30 years ago is the one we are going to take a look at today, which is Fire Pro Wrestling. This iconic franchise was mostly relegated to Japan for a number of years, but has recently been unleashed on the North American market in a big way. The iconic game series has been seen on various systems from the PC Engine, to the Game Boy, to the arcade, and finally the PS4. What major controversy surrounded one of these games? Let's find out as we take a look at the history of Fire Pro Wrestling. In the mid-1980s, when Hulkamania was running wild, so were video games. The arcades featured a number of excellent wrestling titles in the 80s, such as Matmania and Wrestle War, but we also received some stinkers such as WrestleMania for the NES. Growing up, I loved this game and thought it was fantastic being able to play as Hulk Hogan and Bam Bam Bigelow. Now, I don't know if I was on drugs, drunk, or just a bit of a moron, because this game is terrible. Anybody who says otherwise needs to take off their rose-colored Coca-Cola thick glasses and have another look. Over in Japan, game developer Masato Masuda was looking to create a brand new wrestling game for NEC's shiny new PC Engine. He had started the video game company Human Entertainment, whose philosophy was simple: trigger human emotions, making humans more realistic in games. He was no stranger to developing successful wrestling games, as he was the brains behind the iconic NES game Pro Wrestling, which ended up selling 1.4 million copies. Pro Wrestling actually started out life as a port of Matmania, but for unknown reasons, Mr. Masuda decided against it. Some similarities between the two still exist, such as the control scheme and the roving cameraman. Despite its success, Mr. Masuda was not happy with the controls. Pro Wrestling featured the same grapple into technique gameplay as Fire Pro, but there was no timing element involved, so you could just use an auto-fire controller and win every time. It was my desire to remedy this issue which led me to the conclusion that implementing a timing mechanic was the only solution. Mr. Masuda, being a true fan of professional wrestling, wanted to uphold the philosophy of his company by making a realistic wrestling video game. Rumor has it, he began studying matches, bringing cases of videotapes to the Human offices, often rewatching them until the tapes broke. He wanted the controls to be simple and easy to pick up like pro wrestling, but wanted it to feel like a real pro wrestling contest. He wanted to implement other things that were missing from pro wrestling into his new game, which was stamina and limb damage. Finally, he wanted to add submission holds. People were complaining about the lack of submission holds in pro wrestling, so I wanted to make sure they were included in Fire Pro, but just including them wouldn't provide much fun, so I got to thinking, what's the point of submission holds in wrestling? This led me to one of the theories behind pro wrestling. that have concentrated attacks on a single body part to prevent the opponent using it effectively. In order for this to work in the game, I needed to include another parameter apart from stamina so arms and legs could have damage inflicted upon them. The last thing on the list that Mr. Masuda wanted to add was blood, which caused the character's stamina recovery to be greatly hampered. The isometric camera angle used in the game was popularized by All Japan Pro Wrestling. Fire Pro Wrestling Combination Tag was released for the PC Engine in 1989. The first time you play this game or any other Fire Pro game, you will notice the isometric viewpoint of the ring. This was first seen in Championship Wrestling by Epic Software and helps differentiate itself from other pro wrestling games at the time. The other is the fictional roster, which is clearly based on actual in-ring grapplers. The Road Warriors, Bad News Allen, Antonio Inoki, Bruiser Brody, Stan Hansen, and more are all featured. Not only do you get to portray these real-life warriors, but these movesets are accurate as well, including their signature finishers. Clearly, copyright laws were not running wild in the land of the rising sun, so some video game developers had a field day. I'm looking directly at you, Konami. The controls, though, are what sets it apart from every other pro wrestling game at the time. Everything is timing based and not button mashing. This brought a whole new strategic element to these types of games. Just like in a real professional wrestling match, psychology is used to gradually build a match based on the logic of the moves performed and the damage that it does. Fire Pro follows these same rules, making sure you weaken your opponent first before you are allowed to pull off the more powerful moves. For anyone who has played the Fire Pro series, knows that the controls are very intuitive. For example, pushing down and pressing a button can perform a pile driver. Pushing up and pressing a button can perform a suplex. Stamina is also a factor now as well. You and your opponent will both get weaker as the match goes on. As I mentioned, blood is also included, which greatly reduces your ability to recover. Other things that were included to make it more authentic are submissions, disqualifications, and rope breaks. There aren't many modes available, but you do get one-on-one and tag team, which allows two players to compete against each other. The tag team mode has been refined to include interference by the other player who will attempt to break up the pin. The game was a huge hit for the company and solidified Mr. Masuda as the king of wrestling video games. A spin-off title by the name of HAL Wrestling was released for the Game Boy in 1990. This started out by Human as more or less a straight-up port of pro wrestling for the beloved green screen handheld. The basic engine from pro wrestling was translated over, including moves, dives, and suplexes, all of which are found in pro wrestling. However, this included an updated fictionalized roster that featured wrestlers from New Japan and All Japan, such as Vader, the Road Warriors, and Bruiser Brody. Even though everything is there from pro wrestling, it just doesn't quite feel right. The animations are choppy and there's a lot of flicker when the characters are performing certain moves. It never quite achieved pro wrestling glory on the Game Boy, but it's not too bad if you can look past these faults. In 1991, Mr. Masuda and his team spent 2 years refining the engine found in Fire Pro Wrestling Combination Tag and released Fire Pro Wrestling's second bout for the PC Engine. A total of 20 wrestlers were now available, including unlicensed versions of Hulk Hogan, Riki Choshu, Jushin Thunder Liger, The Great Muta, Vader, The Ultimate Warrior, and more. There are even hidden characters that you have to face, such as Luthez. Along with the expanded roster, the wrestlers have received several new moves. The animation for each move has also been greatly increased. New modes were also introduced in addition to the exhibition and tag team modes such as Super Tournament, which is basically a 16-match affair. You also have World Championship Series, which is basically the single-player league. You have to complete a number of these to reach 3 hidden bosses. There is also a code to allow a female referee to be used. Also in 1991, the game made its debut on the Super Famicom entitled, predictably enough, Super Fire Pro Wrestling. This would be the biggest and best Fire Pro game up to that point, and some would consider it a proper sequel to Combination Tag. For starters, the timing system was even more refined, which made a really good game even better. The roster has been increased as well as the number of moves per wrestler. Also, instead of an individual finishing move, each wrestler has a number of signature moves as well. The graphics have also been given a slight boost over the PC Engine, but the animation definitely got kicked up a notch. There are a number of modes as well, including the standard single and tag team, but you also have a 5-man tag team elimination tournament. The Open League mode makes its return. If you're still struggling with the timing, there is a tutorial mode included. One person who did not appreciate all the extras this game had to offer was Giant Baba. He was none too pleased at having his unlicensed image in the game and demanded that they no longer use his likeness in future games. In 1992, Thunder Pro Wrestling Retsuden was released for the Sega Mega Drive. For some strange reason, this is not based off of the Super Famicom version, but an earlier build from the PC Engine. You had a roster of 12 wrestlers available, all based on actual US and Japanese grapplers. While the graphics are decent, the animation is not quite as smooth. Something that is a bit different about this version is that finishers are now displayed in the form of bars at the bottom of the screen. Since you now have a limited amount of finishers available, you have to strategize your match instead of spamming the most powerful move over and over. As far as modes go, there is Exhibition, Tag Team, and World Championship Series. This was actually due to be released in North America as Jesse the Body Ventura Wrestling Superstars, but was canceled. The actual concept of the game caused a falling out between Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura. Mr. McMahon did not want Ventura doing the project, so he walked out. A ROM was leaked online so you can download it and try it out for yourself. 1992 saw the release of Fire Pro Wrestling 3 Legend Bout for the PC Engine. Mr. Masuda considered this to be the true follow-up to the original 1989 classic. Looking at the features, it's no wonder. The roster included 32 wrestlers, which was the most for any Fire Pro game up until that point. As to be expected, the controls have been fine-tuned perfectly with everything balanced just right. Between 50 and 100 new moves were added, and again the animation was improved upon. The game changer of it all was the debut of the Creator Wrestler mode, which has since become a staple in the Fire Pro Wrestling franchise. If the 32 wrestlers weren't enough to choose from and you were fluent in Japanese, you could assemble your very own character. Not only can you choose the physical aspect of your character along with his moveset, but also the logic so that the character wrestles just like he does in real life. The typical match options are available here, but there is now a championship league for you to play through, which unlocks new secret legend characters. (1992) also saw the release of Super Fire Pro Wrestling 2 for the Super Famicom. If you had experienced Fire Pro Wrestling 3 Final Bout for the PC Engine, then you were bound to be a bit disappointed with this Super Famicom release. For some unknown reason, the roster was only expanded to 25 wrestlers as opposed to the 32 found in the latest PC Engine release. There have also been minor improvements as far as the animation and graphics go, but nothing too major. The much beloved Creator Wrestler mode was also missing. There are a few new secret characters that you have to face, including Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid, among others. There is only one new match type which is unlockable, and that is the handicap match, which was previously seen in Thunder Pro Wrestling Retsuden. The most notable feature to be introduced in this game is the critical. This is basically a knockout move which will end the match at any time. Super powerful moves such as Vader's Powerbomb or Stan Hansen's Lariat could deliver these at an alarming rate.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
X は伝説を超えるスーパーファミコン用ゲームソフトスーパーファイヤープロレスリング X 12月22日新発売
Another year, another Fire Pro Wrestling game. 1993 brought about the release of Super Fire Pro Wrestling 3 for the Super Famicom. Mr. Masuda stepped in to oversee the project, and this brought about the best Fire Pro Wrestling game to date. This took everything that made Legend Bout on the PC Engine great and made it even better. The roster was absolutely massive with 64 wrestlers in total, which was the most seen in any professional wrestling game. The graphics look fantastic and the animation once again is just a little bit smoother. Aside from the roster and additional moves though, there isn't much in the way of new content over Legend Bout. Two major additions were introduced in the series for the Super Famicom, and that was a brand new sorting system which allows you to group wrestlers either by affiliation or style of wrestling. And finally, the much beloved Edit mode makes its Super Famicom debut. After the release of this game, Mr. Masuda would take a backseat role as a producer for all future games. Once again, the game was a huge seller and introduced a ton of players to the Fire Pro series. Unfortunately, a lot of these newer players were still having trouble getting the timing down for the moves. A few months later, the company would release Super Fire Pro Wrestling Easy Type, which was a version of the game that made the timing a bit more forgiving and decreased the difficulty in the process. Not quite content with resting on their laurels after having released the series on the PC Engine, Super Famicom, and the Mega Drive, Fire Pro Wrestling Gaiden Blazing Tornado was released in the arcades in 1994. This was developed by the same team that brought us Thunder Pro Wrestling Retsuden, so graphically it looks fantastic. The isometric viewpoint and timing-based grappling system are present, but it's more reminiscent of Capcom's Muscle Bomber or Saturday Night Slam Masters. The game is more of a button masher and also requires half-circle movements on the joystick to perform special moves similar to Muscle Bomber. The roster size has also been decreased to 8, but the sprites themselves are massive and well animated. The controls are where it kind of falls apart, as it doesn't know if it wants to be an arcade game or a simulation as found in the previous Fire Pro games. It ends up leaning slightly towards arcade, but it never really comes together in my opinion. A straight-up port for the Sega Saturn was also released in Japan. 1994 saw the release of the first women's Fire Pro title, Fire Pro Joshi All-Star Dream Slam for the Super Famicom. The game was also fully licensed by All Japan and features 25 female combatants. The roster includes wrestlers such as Bull Nakano, Akira Hokuto, and Aja Kong. You have your standard match types such as Exhibition, Open League, Tournament, Elimination, and the Battle Royal. The controls are typical Fire Pro and everything looks, sounds, and feels great. In 1994, we were treated to perhaps one of the greatest wrestling games available for the Super Famicom, which was Super Fire Pro Wrestling Special. Since Mr. Masuda was only producing, young designer Goichi Suda had taken the reins of the game's development, arguing with Mr. Masuda that the one thing missing from the overall Fire Pro franchise was human emotion. He wanted the player to really feel the emotion and experience the drama of becoming a professional wrestler. The graphics and animation are fantastic and were the best produced up until this point. Storyline-wise though, you take control of Mario Smith, who was an up-and-coming rookie that goes through the trials and tribulations, step by step, facing various challenges and tragic moments of his young wrestling career. This is a spoiler for anybody who doesn't want to know how the game ends, so click off if you plan on playing through it yourself. After winning the world title, your character cannot take the pressure anymore and commits suicide at the end of the game. I can recall importing this game back in 1994 and was blown away by it. I couldn't quite follow along what was going on with the story, but the suicide itself was pretty obvious. As I played through the game, I came across the final boss, which was a guy in a robe who I didn't recognize. Being a Ric Flair fan, I couldn't believe they would actually put him on a higher pedestal in the game than Hulk Hogan or some other Japanese star.
Hey!
Next up on our list is a little seen game for the PC Engine Super CD system. Wrestling Universe Fire Pro Women was released in 1994, and it features fully licensed rosters with both All Japan Pro Wrestling and JWP Joshi Pro Wrestling. This game marks the first CD-ROM based Fire Pro title, and it's actually based on the Super Famicom engine as seen in the previous All Japan Pro Wrestling game. The roster has been doubled, and so has the animation frames, which makes all the moves look even better. As you will notice from the very first time you boot the game up is the Red Book audio soundtrack, which, surprise surprise, sounds great. However, aside from the music and some nice digitized images of each wrestler, this is something that could have been totally done on a cartridge. It's a good little entry into the series, and it does retain the Creator Wrestler mode. As usual, it plays great. By the way, it's a little known fact that professional wrestler Aja Kong modeled her look after meeting my wife for the first time. (1995) saw another Fire Pro game that featured the lovely ladies of Japanese wrestling, which was Super Fire Pro Wrestling Queen Special. Once again, this is fully licensed by All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling and ups the roster to 40 female grapplers. The graphics and animation have been given a significant boost, and everything looks just a bit more realistic. The Creator Wrestler mode is included, and there are even hidden bosses to face.
X は伝説を超えるスーパーファミコン用ゲームソフトスーパーファイヤープロレスリング X 12月22日新発売。
1995 brought what was thought to be the last Fire Pro game on the Super Famicom, which was Super Fire Pro Wrestling X. This featured an expanded roster of over 80 wrestlers and would introduce a large amount of balancing in the MMA style. This also introduced new features such as light heavyweights being able to run up the turnbuckle without having to stop and climb. You can now stand on the ring apron and propel yourself into the ring and perform a drop kick or cross body, for example. Location damage has been improved, which will see you target arms, legs, and the neck of your opponent, and they will show visible signs of pain on the part you are targeting. Unfortunately, development was rushed, and there were several bugs and balancing issues when it came to the various characters. This would be rectified very, very soon. In 1996, Human Entertainment set out to right the wrongs when it came to their Super Fire Pro Wrestling X video game. Thanks to all the negative feedback from the fans when it came to the bugs and the balancing of the characters, they released Super Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium, which, in my opinion, is the greatest 16-bit wrestling game in existence. This game includes over 150 wrestlers, which was the most seen for any wrestling game at the time. It also included 100 new moves as well as a number of increased edit slots, which was also quite limited in the previous X game. Something else that was just a glimmer in all of our American eyeballs was the X-Band service. In Japan, this allowed other users to connect and play certain games online, and X Premium would be the first Fire Pro game to allow online play. Similar to most other games in the series, this game would receive an upgrade in the graphics and animation department, and as usual, they look great. The game was so popular that it even received an English translation patch done by my friend Sidra back in the day. He also co-wrote the WWF In Your House video game FAQ, which is available on GameFAQs.com for your viewing pleasure. However, looking back on it now, I would not recommend playing WWF In Your House. The game is absolutely horrendous, and I would rather have another case of crotch rot than have to go through that again.
Iron Slam! ファイプロが 3D ポリゴンで颯爽と登場。技、臨場感、興奮すべてが桁違い。ファイプロ新次元ファイヤープロレスリングアイアンスラム96 Now on sale!
Also in 1996, Fire Pro made its first jump into 3D with the release of Fire Pro Wrestling Iron Slam 96 for the PlayStation. Now, even though the game is in 3D, the same isometric viewpoint is present, and looking at screenshots of the game, it looks pretty good for an early PlayStation title. The graphics are fairly colorful, but the animation is a bit strange. At times, the moves look pretty good and are fairly smooth when performed. Other times, when a character takes a pile driver, for example, the animations are slow, clunky, and stiff. It's similar to the time when a Viagra got caught in my throat and I had a stiff neck for 9 hours. The fabulous roster of over 150 as found in X Premium has been downgraded to 12, which is to be expected considering the game is now in 3D. The controls are similar to the previous Fire Pro games, but thanks to the lackluster animation, it doesn't quite feel right. The game modes have also been stripped down with only a singles match available. It's a horrible entry into the series, but unfortunately, it's not the absolute worst. I'll get into that one much later. In 1996, the game would make the jump to the Sega Saturn with Pro Wrestling S 6-Men Scramble. This game returns to its excellent 2D sprite-based roots, abandoning the 3D aspect altogether. The main drawing power is the 6-Man Scramble, which allows 6 wrestlers to battle at once, making for some epic battle royals. Since you can now have a 3-on-3 tag team match, triple team moves have also been implemented. Along with the improved visuals, which are looking the best they ever have, comes the roster, which has been upgraded to around 160 wrestlers. There are around 40 specific bodies you can create that are not in the game, such as Harley Race, Rick Rude, Ted DiBiase, and the Destroyer. The number of moves available have also increased slightly. There is now a breathing system which will give the player the option to regain stamina, so another element of strategy has to be utilized. There is also a headlock and drag move for better placement on your opponent. For the longest time, this was considered the greatest Fire Pro game to ever come along. Keep up. Keep up. The Fire Pro brand would take a break for a few years, but in the meantime, Human dipped its toes back into the 3D well. All Japan Pro Wrestling King Soul was released for the PlayStation in 1999. Having taken a look at their previous 3D outing, Iron Slam 96, they've realized what worked and what didn't and attempted to rectify all the mistakes with this game. The presentation is outstanding, especially for an original PlayStation game. The graphics look fantastic and some of the models look eerily realistic. There are 25 wrestlers available, but 60 more that you can create in the edit mode. The edit mode is fantastic with extremely realistic versions of actual wrestlers such as the Big Boss Man, Undertaker, Sabu, Andre the Giant, and more. Having been a big fan of the Fire Pro series and saw what good reviews this was getting, I imported it back in the day when it came out, and it was well worth the $100 price tag. The game feels like you're watching an episode of All Japan Pro Wrestling, complete with ring entrances, authentic music, and commentary, which even included Giant Baba. Speaking of the entrances, they did a fantastic job, and it's so awesome to see Stan Hansen walking to the ring brandishing his bullwhip. The controls are a hybrid of Fire Pro Wrestling and Virtual Pro Wrestling by Aki, which I'm sure I will cover at some point. Similar to Fire Pro, each button represents a strength going from the weakest to the strongest. Depending on which directional input is used, it will determine what strike will be initiated. You can also initiate a grapple similar to Virtual Pro Wrestling, but after it's initiated, the wrestlers will lock up and the timing aspect from Fire Pro returns. One major addition to the game is the use of power balls, which range from 2 to 4 per wrestler. They are used in different situations throughout the match, allowing the wrestler to perform a signature move, or if you are severely damaged, you can use it to kick out of a pinfall. Similar to other Fire Pro games, specific limb damage has also been included, which weakens their attack strength. The moves have been motion captured perfectly, and it's quite possibly some of the best character models on the original PlayStation. The longer a match goes, the more fatigued a wrestler gets. It's incredibly realistic and is definitely one of my favorite 3D wrestlers on the system.
なだれ式逆に丸めていった。ロープに逃れます。キックを打っていきます。
Released just a few months after the fantastic King Soul comes Fire Pro G for the original PlayStation. This game reverts back to its sprite-based roots and also its unlicensed roots, as the All Japan license is nowhere to be found. The game is based on 6-man Scramble for the Saturn, but it adds numerous moves as well as upping the roster to almost 200 wrestlers. We even get separate American federations, including the WWC Federation, or WCW, which includes Goldberg, Ric Flair, Kevin Nash, and DDP, among others. As far as the WFW, or WWF, we get Stone Cold, Andre, the Road Warriors, Shawn Michaels, The Rock, Mankind, Goldust, and more. A new feature was added to the gameplay, which is the one-shot reversal ability, which a player can unleash a critical out of nowhere on certain close call conditions. Fighting Road, which was the story mode, returns, but it's nowhere near as dark as what was found in Fire Pro Special. This one uses quite a bit of humor throughout. The game is fantastic to play and is definitely one of my favorites on the PlayStation. This would be the swan song for the series, and soon after, the employees would be splintered out, with one forming a new company by the name of Spike.
1, 2.
In the year 2000, we were treated to Fire Pro Wrestling for the WonderSwan. For those of you who don't know, the WonderSwan was a black and white handheld that was released only in Japan. The game is based on Super Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium, but with obviously monochrome graphics and an updated roster. The roster was absolutely huge with over 150 wrestlers. The edit mode from Premium also made it over into this version. The sprites are large and detailed and are well animated, but there is some flickering which I don't know if it's an emulation issue or not. The controls had to be reconfigured due to fewer buttons available on the WonderSwan. With that being said, the game still feels great and is Fire Pro through and through. The game could also be played online thanks to the WonderSwan's network capabilities. It's too bad a Fire Pro game this good couldn't have been done with the original Game Boy hardware. Speaking of the Game Boy, 2001 brought us the first color handheld release of Fire Pro Wrestling for the Game Boy Advance. This one was actually released here in the States, but there were some differences between this version and the Japanese release. The American version featured recolored grapplers to avoid any sort of copyright infringement. If you are playing this on an emulator, a color patch has been released that will restore them to their proper glory. The timing has also been made just a little bit easier. The game itself is based on Fire Pro Wrestling G and features everything you would expect from that title, including the much beloved Create a Wrestler mode. One new feature is the Audience Approval mode, which after each match the audience will rate you on how well the match was performed. You can even link this up and play head-to-head against a buddy. The gameplay is great, and it sure was awesome taking Fire Pro on a road trip back in the day. Also in 2001, we were treated to the release of Fire Pro Wrestling D for the Dreamcast. For the longest time, this was the biggest and best Fire Pro game to ever come along. The game sported over 300 wrestlers as well as over 100 new moves. The story mode was taken out, but a new mode will allow players to take on a set number of grapplers to unlock create parts and various belts. Even though the Dreamcast had network capabilities, online play was not available. However, the company did produce a number of DLC content, including 60 DLC moves, and also added a custom pack of edited wrestlers. The edit mode was also greatly improved upon and allowed for custom arenas and mats to be made with great precision using the Dreamcast mouse. The graphics look spectacular, with the resolution having been increased up to VGA. The game allows for 4-on-4 matches for a total of 8 wrestlers on the screen at once. Your traditional match types are still available, along with exploding death cage matches, regular cage matches, fluorescent light bulb matches, and the octagon with UFC rules. As was typical with other Fire Pro games in the series that were released in Japan, everything is in Japanese. Thankfully, there now exists an English translation patch which makes the game a whole lot easier to play. As I mentioned, this was one of the best Fire Pro games to ever come along and would hold that title for a number of years. Fire Pro Wrestling 2 was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2002. The Japanese version featured a management of ring mode, but it was taken out of the American version for some reason. A number of other things were apparently taken out, including the octagon and tournament mode. This mode allows you to create your own federation and book shows based upon the talent available. While the English version did take out this mode, it did up the edit slots to 77, whereas the Japanese release utilized only 42. It also added a few new moves, better submissions, and being able to edit women in the create mode. It also added more American wrestlers, upping the roster to just about 200. You'll even see some knockoff versions of famous characters such as Batman, Robin, Chuck Norris, Rocky Balboa, and Bruce Lee. Regardless of the missing content, it's still a fantastic game to play, especially for a little Fire Pro on the go. And that takes care of the history of Fire Pro Wrestling Part 2. Tune in next week as I take a look at the best Fire Pro game in the series and also the worst Fire Pro game ever. King of Coliseum Red was another spin-off developed by the same folks who brought us the Fire Pro franchise and released it in the fall of 2002. This series goes back to its 3D roots once again with a brand new engine utilizing a high number of characters and moves. To be specific, the roster included over 80 licensed wrestlers from New Japan, All Japan, and Pancrase. We still have a few look-alike wrestlers which obviously had to be changed for rights issues. The unique aspect of this game was that it was the first title that would feature rival promotions New Japan and All Japan working together in video game form. The gameplay is very similar to their previous title, King Soul, but running at a much faster and smoother frame rate. The Powerballs also make their return. The game has over 1,000 different moves to be used in the game. The counter or reversal system is very in-depth and makes for some fantastic chain wrestling. Weight detection is also back, but again it has been refined. The edit mode is also similar to the one found in King Soul, but this time you can take your character to the trial mode where you can unlock moves and new wrestlers. You can also install the game on the hard drive, which greatly reduces loading times. Released just a few short months after King of Coliseum Red, King of Coliseum Green was released. This saw the inclusion of licensed promotions such as Pro Wrestling Noah and 01. There were over 70 wrestlers to choose from, but one fantastic feature was the ability to combine the two rosters into one if you owned both games. This brought the total of wrestlers to over 150, which was unheard of for a 3D wrestling game back in the day. Everything from the entrances to the running commentary to the actual moves themselves look and sound fantastic, and this is definitely one of the best wrestling games on the PlayStation 2.
グーパンチものすごいグーだ立たせていくバックを取ってスイートグラックシー
In 2003, Fire Pro Wrestling Z was released for the PlayStation 2. Most of the features found in Fire Pro Wrestling D were brought over, and since this was considered to be the last Fire Pro Wrestling game due to the long production times and cost factors, they decided to go all out by including requested items such as the story mode, which was last seen in Fire Pro G. The story mode revolves around 6 wrestlers, all based on real-life characters with slight changes to avoid any sort of licensing issues. One thing that did not make the trip over from the Dreamcast was the network option, as well as being able to use the mouse in the create mode. As far as brand new moves added to the game, there were 50 or so available. There are now 385 different head models to use in the create mode. There is an unofficial translation patch available for download, but it only translated the menus and not the story mode. When the game was released, it came in 2 editions. The first one being the standard version of the game, and the second one being the retirement bundle box, which included a number of extras, such as a large box with a bottle opener, phone strap, and a documentation on the creation of the series, starting with the very first Fire Pro Wrestling.
Give up!
2004 came along and we were treated to King of Coliseum 2 for the PlayStation 2. This would be the first game that all major Japanese federations would be featured, including New Japan, All Japan, Noah, and 01 all on the same disc. What this amounted to was over 150 wrestlers and almost 3,000 moves included in the game. It also showcases one of the coolest covers I have ever seen in a wrestling title, featuring Misawa, Chono, Hashimoto, and Muto all on the cover wearing suits and looking pretty fly for a bunch of Japanese guys. Of course, the edit mode is one of the star attractions, and there are now over 1,700 different parts to create, combine, and play around with to create various wrestlers from around the world. The controls are very similar to the first King of Coliseum game, which to be honest are very good for a 3D title. The Powerball system makes its return as well. You have your typical match assortments including singles, tag team, handicap, triple threat, battle royal, and a 5-on-5 team elimination match. The big addition to this version is Survival Road, which is equivalent to the story mode in the Fire Pro series. You have to fight the top wrestlers in each promotion to unlock rings, wrestler templates, outfits, and wrestlers themselves. This also includes a matchmaker mode, which allows you to be the booker, a title match mode, and the dojo, which is the training mode that you can use if you're still struggling with the timing mechanics. The commentary itself has also been improved, and something I noticed happening more and more were the announcers getting more and more excited as the match continued. Sometimes the announcers will lose their mind if there's a 2.9 near fall. This is a fantastic update, but unfortunately it was the last in the King of Coliseum series.
10分経過10 minutes
フェイスクラッシャーペースを持っていきたいですね。立たせていく。ウルネルソンからドラゴンだ。
They say wrestlers never really stay retired, and the same can be said of Fire Pro Wrestling. Fire Pro Wrestling Returns was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2005. This one was actually released in North America, and it brought back every feature from Fire Pro Wrestling Z, but this time the roster was up to 300 wrestlers and over 1,500 moves to choose from. There were slight improvements made to the gameplay, such as a charge move which can be used for Shawn Michaels' Sweet Chin music and Muto's Shining Wizard. Another cool addition is being able to dive off the cage like a crazy person. This game came about because sales were low on King of Coliseum 2, and the fan demand for this game was extremely high. If you love Fire Pro Wrestling, and I know you do, then you know what to expect from this title. The graphics and animation are superb, and there is no slowdown with all the action going on. It was so nice being able to pop this into my PlayStation 2 out of the box and being able to play without having to rely on a Japanese translation guide. This was cited as professional wrestlers Rob Van Dam and Stevie Richards' favorite wrestling title. Thanks to the presence of GameFAQs and Critical Club, we are able to use PlayStation 2 saves on your PlayStation 2 emulator. The advantage of this is being able to import a file with all of the wrestlers correctly renamed and hundreds of edits, all with the correct logic. GameFAQs also has a bunch of different saves for King of Coliseum and various other Fire Pro titles. However, for this version of Fire Pro, this is definitely a must-have. The world of Fire Pro would remain silent for a number of years after the fantastic release of Fire Pro Returns. Rumblings would soon emerge about a version coming for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. This was to be known as Fire Pro Wrestling HD and featured full 1080p support with high-resolution sprites. It would also feature a rebuilt game engine, multiplayer support over Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network, but the big juicy tank tickler of it all was the promise of full English menus. It didn't take long for it to come out though that it was just an elaborate hoax. Fire Pro fans were up in arms while others got a big chuckle out of it, myself not included. Meanwhile, back in Japan, Fire Pro fans were treated to a version of the game for Japanese mobile phone networks by the name of Fire Pro Wrestling M. This was not a full-fledged Fire Pro game as it was quite limited due to the technology available at the time. What it amounted to was being able to create your character, and that was about it. It was a Tamagotchi type game where you train your character to build up their stats and equip them with a whopping 3 moves. You would then have your character face off against the CPU. The more matches you win, the more you could upgrade your stats and earn better parts and moves. If you didn't feel like grinding, you could always purchase these items with actual currency. The game was only in service for about 8 months and shut down in June of 2012. Thanks to Miguel over on Reddit for this information. People were definitely disappointed that the rumored Xbox 360 version of the game was a complete and utter fabrication. All I can say is, be careful for what you wish for. Before I start talking about the next game, let me point out the fact that over the last 4 years and 200 retrospectives and documentaries I've done, I have not cursed once. Sure, you might find a fart here or a toot there, and even possibly a short, sweet, queefy blast, but that was the extent of it. Fire Pro Wrestling was announced for Xbox Live Arcade in 2012. Fire Pro fans rejoiced. No screenshots were shown at the time, but when I got my first look at the game in action, there was only one thing I could say. Jesus, Harold, Christ on a cracker, what in the hell is this? The last time I was in such shock, awe, and disbelief was when George Clooney pulled out the Bat credit card in Batman and Robin.
Never leave the cave without it.
With that being said, this would be the first full Fire Pro game in 8 years since Fire Pro Wrestling Returns was released. As you can see from the clips, this uses your avatar in a full 3D based party game. Up to 4 players can compete against each other, and that's where the fun ends. Gone is the timing-based grapple system, and in its place is a first button to grapple, second button to execute the move type of system. something called a power push system was created, which requires intense button mashing to break free from holds. The animations are horrendous and it makes WWE All-Stars look like a Picasso. It did have 300 different parts of costumes and upgradable moves, but clearly this game was going to be sold on the Fire Pro name alone, which makes this the worst Fire Pro game ever.
A new Fire Pro Wrestling game, huh? I got this.
Kenny Omega starting out strong. An elbow to the face. Omega won't take this sitting down. And a low blow. He'll be feeling that tomorrow. This can't be good. It looks like a devastating pile driver.
Not like this.
Is this lights out for Omega?
Kenny!
But wait. Kota Ibushi's at the ropes. Begging Kenny to tag him in. Turn your living room into a ring with Fire Pro Wrestling World. Fight alongside and against your favorite New Japan Pro Wrestling talent in the all-new scenario mode. Edit custom wrestlers, title belts, and more to book your dream match. Then, share your creations online and battle with players from around the globe.
Golden Trigger!
Who do you have in your corner?
Tag a friend, and we'll see you in the ring.
Fire Pro Wrestling World, available August 28th.
2017 was a banner year for Fire Pro fans. Fire Pro Wrestling World was announced to huge fanfare from the Fire Pro community, and it would also be released on PlayStation 4 and Steam. For over 10 years, designer Matsumoto Tomoyuki, who got his start working with Human and had later joined Spike to continue working on the series, wanted to bring the game to modern systems. The company showed zero interest. Thankfully, Steam came along and it showed Spike that there was a lot of value in introducing their games to the Western market. They finally agreed, and in December 2017, the game went into early access on the platforms. The game uses the same familiar 2D sprites that have been upscaled to HD resolution at a full 1080p. All of the features from Fire Pro Returns makes their return, and the game now includes over 1,000 moves. Japanese copyright laws were changed, so look-alike wrestlers were not as viable as they were in the past. Matsumoto included support for the Steam Workshop, which is a tool for players to create and share modified content and upload their creations for other people to download. This also lets Spike off the hook from any sort of lawsuits. The game's edit mode is just as good as the one found in Fire Pro Returns, although thanks to the PC you get an insane amount of freedom when creating your wrestlers. You can now include custom MP3 files for your entrance music and custom logos as well. One major addition is the online play, which sees players from around the world match up to see who's the best when it comes to the world of Fire Pro. Up to 8 people can compete online in the same match. During early access, it was announced that New Japan Pro Wrestling would become an official part of the game, and it would include a story mode entitled Fighting Road. The game is absolutely fantastic, and the creates some people have made are mind-blowing. Even as of just a few months ago, I've seen some excellent cel-shaded creations such as He-Man, Skeletor, and Scooby-Doo. If you have a modern system and you only own one Fire Pro game in your life, be sure and check this one out. There were a couple of cell phone only versions of Fire Pro that came out in the early 2000s, but they were gone just as quick as a fart in the wind. Fire Pro Wrestling I and Fire Pro Wrestling J were cell phone exclusives that were basically roster management simulations. You create your own wrestler, train him, and challenge other wrestlers. Not much is known about these two games, and they have since been lost to the sands of time. When I started this series, I didn't realize how big the fan base for the franchise had become. I know all the times I've played this over the years and how much joy and excitement it's brought me and my friends, but didn't realize it was as huge as it was. Thanks to the mostly unlicensed roster, we get to relive our dream matches with excellent controls and a little bit of suicide thrown in that was inspired by Kurt Cobain, according to Goichi Suda. Just a little side note, he wrote a happy ending as well as a suicide ending, but at the end of the day, he opted to only have the suicide ending. I think this sets it apart from other games back in the day, and here we are 30 years later still talking about it. Unfortunately, Masuda Masato passed away a few years back, but he created a game series that is still going strong for over 30 years. Masuda's voice has even graced the Fire Pro games as the referee. Remember, a winner is you, so thanks for watching. I wanted to give a special shout out to the website Critical Club, which is an excellent resource for all Fire Pro wrestling games. I also wanted to give a big shout out to Shadowmaster on the forum for scanning in the various Fire Pro guidebooks. Rumblings have persisted since the release of Fire Pro Wrestling World that a new game was in development. The series director has stated that it could potentially move to the 3D arena, which would be something different than King of Coliseum. To celebrate the 35th anniversary, there was a t-shirt giveaway which looked pretty freaking cool, to be honest.
Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday comes again.
毎日
Sunday,
毎
Monday,
日
Tuesday,
日立の
Wednesday,
細長
Thursday, Thursday,
静
Friday,
か
Saturday,
サラサラ
Sunday comes again.
綺麗な空気体には細長が気持ちいいんです日立のビッグフローウェルネス
日立ふれあい感謝デー日立のお店
It goes without saying that this is one of, if not the greatest, pro wrestling video game franchises on the planet. The controls do take a little bit of getting used to, but they are so much better than typical games from the early 90s that once you get the hang of it, you'll be suplexing and pile driving your way to victory. If you've never had the chance to play the greatest wrestling video game series of all time, be sure and give it a shot. Or a chop. You'll be glad you did. Big thanks to Leapin' Lanny Poffo, brother of Randy Macho Man Savage, for doing his impression at the start of this video.
What's up, Pat Man? This is AJ. I said I could do Macho Man and send you my attempt. If you don't like it, it's all good. It's not the best, but I can do. Do it on my lunch break here at work. Figure out to send you something now. That way, it doesn't take too long.
Ooh, yeah! Dig it! Happy little games! Yeah! Happy little games! Yeah!
Oh, yeah, look what the kid dragged in. Come here, kitty, kitty, kitty. He dragged you in. A bag full of the madness. Yeah, so you're welcome in advance. And right now, and I can't take it back, but you're justifiably in a place that you may rather not be in, but you're here. So give it your all, yeah. So get all up, be that sponge, and take in everything that is the madness. The reigning champion. Oh, yeah. Now, that's not to say because I have all of this madness, you're gonna have a good day every day, maybe even twice on Sunday. Yeah, it's not gonna happen. You're gonna have those bad days and good days again because you're not the Macho Man. Well, yeah, but I am here to tell you that there are gonna be those days but you're gonna be able to get through all those days. Yeah, if you remember one valuable lesson. 2, that you're not the madness, and that's okay. No one can be. Just me, the Macho Man. But 2, you gotta make sure, above all else, just like what you put in your cup of joe in the morning, you gotta be the cream of the crop. Oh yeah, you gotta be the cream of the crop and rise to the top. Yeah, on that time where you think that you can't do it right, and you're in a meeting for over an hour, and you're justifiably in that position that you'd rather not be in again, and you can just get everything solved in an email, and then you regret and say, why did I join this meeting? Yeah, but you did, and you gotta go all the way through it. Trains just don't stop. Do they stop? Elizabeth? Never mind. Yeah. Anyways, you get the gist of what I'm saying. Make sure, again, you can't be me. You can possibly buy a replica of this belt, yeah, but you won't be me. But at least you can be you. And you alone control how you rise to the top, yeah. So slap to a Slim Jim, rise to the top like the cream in your coffee, give it your all, possibly not join that meeting that you know can be solved with just that. Anyways, yeah, you get what I'm saying, you get what I'm putting down. I write the music notes, but you're the one who's gotta play the piano. Ooh, yeah. Get yourself a Slim Jim, listen to this every morning, and you possibly could be at that level. But if not, watch the video, soak in the madness, be you, and rise to the top. Oh, yeah.
If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you can always click the donate button up above. Thanks everyone for watching.